Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my first pregnancy and birth story. I have a 1-year-old son and his name is Judah Brian. He was born to us on December the 23rd, 2017. And I'm going to insert a little clip of him at the end so you guys can see what he looks like now, because he's a lot bigger than he was when he was born. But he was born to us, and I found out that I was pregnant because I had been feeling very sick and was getting sick at work, and my best friend convinced me that I needed to go home that day and take a pregnancy test because it wasn't normal to be getting sick for several days in a row. So I decided to do that. I had also, this was in April 2017, probably about a week prior to finding out that I was expecting. I had been craving random candy bars and sodas that I had never wanted really before. So root beer and almond Snickers were like my go-to. I can remember 2 different nights in a row being at home in bed and wanting to just go to the store and get Snickers candy bar and a root beer. So my cravings were already off. That should have been a sign. But I did, after work that day, decide to go home and take a pregnancy test. And I remember on my way home calling my husband now, who was not yet my husband at the time, and telling him that I wanted to take a pregnancy test. And he was like, okay. But we knew that we wanted a family eventually, and we knew that we would get married eventually, but we just weren't necessarily planning on starting our family right then. So going home, I remember that I had an old pregnancy test from the summer before, where one of my friends wanted to take a pregnancy test with me, and we went and bought one. And a lot of the times when you buy them, you buy like a twin pack where there's 2 of them in the pack. So I remember that she had taken one of them, and the other one was still left over under my medicine cabinet at home. So I decided to go home that day and to take that test. And immediately, as soon as I took it, before the line even got all the way across saying that it was like processing or reading, it had 2 positive lines and it gave me a positive result. And I was like, okay, obviously this test is expired. I need to go to Walgreens and get a different test. So I leave immediately and go buy another test, and as soon as I got in my car to go to Walgreens to buy a second test, I remember saying a little prayer, and I pretty much had a gut feeling then that I probably was pregnant. So went to Walgreens, bought the test, came home, took a second test, and same thing, like before it even got all the way across, immediately there were 2 lines there with this brand new test that was not expired. And I knew in that moment that I was probably pregnant. And I remember walking downstairs and holding the test in my hand. And I remember Blake seeing me, and I started to cry, and I told him that obviously it was positive, and I was just in shock. And he was like, well, why are you crying? Like, we're gonna get married, and you know, we're gonna have a family one day, so here we go, let's do this. And I was just like, I was not planning on this. We had a big like friend, like 15 to 20 of us, going on a huge booze cruise to just celebrate the beginning of summer and everything else. We had that planned in like 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember thinking like, I am not going to be able to go on this cruise, or if I am, then I'm just going to be, you know, not with the friend group, not able to participate in any of the drinking or anything else. So I remember just panicking about the upcoming trip that we had planned, which in hindsight is so funny now. Yes, we still went on the cruise. Yes, I still had a blast. Yes, I threw up every single day just from seasickness, morning sickness. And we hadn't at that point yet gone to the doctor to confirm our pregnancy, because whenever I called to schedule an appointment after getting a positive result with a home test, They told me that you typically have to wait several, like 3 to 4, sometimes 6 weeks after getting a positive result before you can even get into your OBGYN to have them check you and confirm the pregnancy, just because in the beginning so much can happen. It's not uncommon to have an early miscarriage, which I didn't really know at the time, but after having a baby and getting more in tune with other moms, I find that that is a lot more common than I realized. So anyways, they had me wait a couple of weeks, and it wasn't until after the cruise that we went to the doctor to confirm it for sure. So on the cruise, we weren't really telling all of our friend group, just some of our best, closest friends, since we hadn't announced our pregnancy yet. And so everyone was like, I guess every day, because I was getting sick, they're like, she's hungover, she doesn't need to drink anything, like she doesn't need a mimosa with breakfast this morning. And really, it was just morning sickness or seasickness or something. So went on throughout my pregnancy. Eventually it was confirmed, obviously, that we were pregnant. We found out we were having a boy. We told all of our friends and family, and everyone was super excited for us. But throughout this entire pregnancy, I kid you not, from April, a couple of days before finding out that I was pregnant, until I gave birth in December on the 23rd, every single day, several times a day, I'm gonna say anywhere from 3 to 30 times a day, I was getting sick and vomiting. And it was every single day. I can remember people telling me, like my clients, whenever, because keep in mind I worked through all of this, I can remember going in between clients into the back room or running outside to get sick really quickly. It was such an awful time of nausea. I was prescribed Zofran, and people were telling me to just wait until I got into my second trimester, because then it would slack off and it would be easier and I wouldn't feel as nauseous. And that was like the honeymoon of pregnancy, is your second trimester. So I can remember waiting all through, you know, April and May and June and even into July, and thinking like, okay, any day now I'm gonna start feeling better. But it never happened. It did get a little bit easier to manage over time, but it would still come on very strong and happen several times a day, so where I was still getting sick all the way until I gave birth. So that's what my pregnancy was like. I didn't gain a ton of weight. I probably gained, I can't remember the exact number, I want to say I was like 147 when I gave birth. So I probably gained about 30 pounds or so. Maybe, yeah, probably about 30 pounds. And I lost it fairly quickly. I had a pretty easy birth itself, but I can remember probably I stopped working about 10 days before my due date, because at that point I was just tired all the time. I work on my feet, so my feet were super swollen and they would get really red, and I just had no business working all day long 10 days before I gave birth. Whenever you're 40 weeks pregnant, that's very hard to manage. So I can remember probably about, I think it was the day before my due date actually, going into the salon with my mom so she could have her hair done, so she would have beautiful fresh hair when the baby was born. And also because she knew she wouldn't be able to get me back into the salon for a good little while. So we went ahead and got that covered. But the day of my due date, my husband woke up that morning and asked me if I thought that I was going to be having a baby that day, if I felt any different, and I didn't. So we decided that he would still go to work until I actually started my delivery process, and then he would take his leave after I had the baby. But up until I had the baby, he wanted to work as much as possible. So the day of my due date, he asked me that morning, and I told him to just go to work, and he did. I can remember just kind of hanging out around the house, not doing a ton that day, but prepping just for last minute things. Whenever I would bring the baby home, I wanted certain things to be clean and laundry to be done. So I was just finishing that up, and I remember going for a walk around, there's a local park here called Lake Ella, and I did a couple of laps around the track that goes around the lake, and I was trying to start my labor process, and I remember this older man stopping me and asking when the baby would be born, and I told him that today was my due date and I was trying to speed things along and start the process, and he said, well, you pay attention because between midnight and 4 a.m. things are really gonna progress. And I remember thinking, like, that is so weird, but okay, like, I hope so. I'm ready to have this baby. So I walked a little bit more. I came home around the time that my husband got off of work, and we went over to my mother-in-law's for dinner because we just wanted to spend some time with her, and we ordered stir fry. We got takeout to her house. So I remember her saying, if you go into labor after having this dinner, everyone's gonna say like, oh, you must need to eat stir fry, because everyone was suggesting different recipes and things to eat to help promote labor. So anyways, ate the stir fry and it did work. But I went home after eating, and I remember during dinner feeling a little bit of pain and cramping. So we decided to head home as soon as we were done eating and just kind of rest and go ahead and start getting ready for bed that night. And we did. I remember Blake and I loved to watch the show Friends. That was literally all that played on our Netflix. We watched it 24/7. And I was in the living room bouncing on my birthing ball. He's sitting on the couch and we're watching Friends. And by this point, it's probably almost 11 o'clock. And he's like, all right, if we're not having a baby today, I'm gonna go ahead and go to bed, because if I go to work in the morning, I'm gonna have to get up really early. So my due date by this point had almost came and went, and he went to bed, and I decided to stay up just a little while longer and continue bouncing. And then I said I would come to bed and I would let him know if anything changed or I needed any, help. I would wake him up. So I bounced for a little bit longer, and I noticed that the pains that I was having, they were a little bit uncomfortable, but I had read an article online saying if you were in active labor, you wouldn't be able to walk or talk through the contractions. And I wasn't feeling that way. I felt like I could walk and talk through them. They weren't comfortable, but I'm like, there's no way these are active labor contractions, but I might as well, just for the sake of it, since it is my due date. I had a little app that was a contraction tracker on my phone. Like, I might as well just go ahead and for this last hour before I go to bed, track the actual contractions that I'm having. Let's see how far apart these little pains are. So I pulled it out, and as soon as you have one, you click a button and the contraction happens, and once it's done, you click the same button. And after so long, it takes an average of how many you're having per hour and how long they're lasting. So probably about halfway through the hour at 11:30, I decided to go ahead and go get in bed. They were getting a little bit more intense, and I didn't want to bounce on the birthing ball anymore. So I went and laid in bed, tracked them for another half hour, and by this point I was having to kind of like push myself up from the bed, and I wasn't just leaning over. They were definitely getting more intense. And by midnight, my app said that the average was they were lasting for a minute and they were 4 minutes apart, which is pretty much prime time to go to the hospital. Your labor is starting. It's time to be seen by a doctor. So I woke my husband up and I told him it was time. And whenever he actually woke up, he was like, are you sure? Because if you are, I'm going to pack snacks. And sure enough, he did. And while he went to pack snacks, I decided that I wanted to get in the shower so I could at least wash and blow dry my hair. I knew there would be pictures taken whenever the baby was born, and I just wanted to feel pretty. So I decided to get in the shower. I started washing my hair, and during this time, the pain got so intense, just standing on my feet, I guess, in the warm water, I don't know. But it was to the point where I was having to sit down in the shower. I couldn't stand up anymore. And as soon as I got out, I threw my hair in a towel and I'm begging my husband to take me to the hospital because I did not, I did not even care about blow drying. The pain was getting very intense. So we finally make it to the hospital, which we had been to a couple of times prior just to like register and to kind of learn our way around, so that way when we were in labor, if it was a rush, we would know where to go. And we did that. We drove to the main front parking lot and walked up to the door, and as soon as we got up to the door, there was a sign on the door that said, during the hours of midnight and 5 a.m., please use the emergency exit on the other side of the building. So I'm like, Blake, I cannot make it around. I was literally like screaming at this point, wincing over in pain with my soaking wet hair in the middle of the parking lot. And so he sprints back to the car and drives it around to where I am, picks me up and puts me back in the car, and then we drive the car to the emergency entrance and we walk in. And as soon as we walk in, right there at the door, I remember there was a wheelchair, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't anyone else's. I think it was just for guests that would come to the hospital and needed it. I'm assuming, I'm hoping that's what it was for, because I just sat my butt right down in it and I was like, wheel me to the front desk. And so they did, and whenever I got up to the front desk, I'm like holding my belly, I'm wincing over in pain, and the guy says, so what brings you guys in today? And I just look at him and I like glare, like, and he goes, clearly humor was not the way to go. We'll get you guys checked into triage. And for those of you who don't know, triage is before you get your own hospital room, they have to confirm that you actually are in active labor. So they take you to this room with a bunch of beds that are just separated by curtains, and they hook you up to these computers basically that monitor your contractions and confirm that you are in active labor, and they will also check to see how dilated you are at this point and everything else. So when we were in the waiting room right before we got called back to go into triage, I told Blake to call our parents and let them know that the process was starting. We were at the hospital and we were probably going to be having a baby soon. So he did. He calls them. My parents are like an hour and a half away from me at this point, and his mom's only 20 minutes or so away. So they decided to get up, start getting ready, and make their way over to the hospital. And my birth plan was to have an epidural and then give natural birth if I could, with the epidural, of course. And that was my birth plan. So they checked me back into triage. They hooked me up to all these machines and started monitoring me. And by this point, I was fully aware that I was in active labor. I was in intense pain. The baby was literally trying to come out, sitting on the triage bed. This may be TMI, so if you get grossed out, or I don't know, if you're triggered by intense pain, you might want to click off. But there was blood all over the table where I was laying. Like, this baby was literally trying to rip out of me. And I can remember you have to be monitored for several minutes, so it felt like a literal eternity before they could confirm that I was in labor, which I already knew. And finally, after a long time, they came back in. They told me that they would put me into my own hospital room because I was in labor. And they checked me and they said at this point I was between 6 and 7 centimeters dilated, and if I wanted to have an epidural, I needed to let them know now, because I had to receive an entire bag of fluids through IV before they could administer the epidural. So I'm like, yes, put me in my room, like, let's get this going because I need some drugs. And they finally did. I'm not even gonna get into the whole story of them giving me the IV because they had to stick me a million times and it was a huge bloody mess. But they finally got the IV in me. They finally gave me the entire bag of fluids, which again felt like another eternity. And during this time, they had like some of their front desk people coming in and like taking some of our payment information and different, you know, insurance information. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, now is not the time. And Blake is trying to handle that and he's trying to handle me. And finally, once I finish my fluids, the nurse comes in and she says, okay, you know, now that you finished your fluids, we can give you the epidural. However, the doctor that is on staff right now has called an emergency C-section for another one of our patients, and they have to go administer an epidural to her first, and it's about a 45-minute procedure. However, we're afraid that you're gonna dilate too far past the point of being able to receive one in that amount of time. So, I start panicking at this point. I'm literally crying and I am looking up at my husband and I'm like, I'm gonna die. Like, that's it. Say your goodbyes because I don't know how women possibly do this. I'm not gonna make it. And he comes over and he's like, let me just pray for you, because he had no idea what else to do at this point. And I mean, nothing better. So he laid his hands on me and he prayed for me, and I kid you not, the second he said amen, the anesthesiologist walked in that hospital door and said, we're gonna go ahead and just administer yours really quickly. As long as you can be still through your contractions and you're not squirming around, then I can give this to you rather quickly. And I was like, thank God. And they let Blake stay in the room while they administered the epidural. So I remember him standing in front of me and me just like leaning into him. And I told him prior to this that I didn't want anyone else, none of our family or anything, to come into the room until after I had gotten my epidural. Because I knew I was in a lot of pain and that I wasn't showing the happiest, most delightful side of myself. So I just didn't want anyone in there until I felt a little bit of relief. And as they're administering the epidural and Blake is standing in front of me and I'm just leaning over the bed with a needle like this long in my back, my parents open up my hospital door and I'm like, get out. They're like, okay, and they just shut the door back. And anyways, finally I get my epidural, and it took more to one side than the other, so I had to lay on one side for probably about 20 minutes, which honestly wasn't that bad. I was just happy to have a little bit of relief. By that point, my parents were allowed to come in. I was feeling better. Blake's family started to show up, and I sent him down to the car to get my makeup brushes and my makeup. Since I couldn't have my hair done, it was just air dried. I wanted to at least put on a little bit of my face and feel somewhat normal-ish. And so he went and got my makeup out of the car. I glammed up a little bit. By this point, it's probably 4 in the morning, which looking back now, it's so weird because my most intense part of labor was when that man said it would be. That was just the random man at the park when I was walking. So interesting, weird fact. So once I finished that, they came in and they were like, okay, we're gonna give you a little bit of, I believe it's called Pitocin. It's basically just some kind of drug they put in your IV that helps speed up labor a little bit. And they gave me some for probably about 10 minutes, and then they came back and checked me and they were like, oh God, okay, turn it off, that's enough, because at that point I was about to have the baby. So they checked me one last time and they called Blake to the foot of the bed and they were like, that's your little guy's head. He was crowning. And prior to this, Blake had, at all my doctor's appointments, been telling my OBGYN, who he had known since he was a child, because my doctor's son and my, at the time, fiance were really good friends growing up. So they had a good family friendship relationship established already. So he had been telling our doctor, I want to deliver this baby myself. Like, I want you to just stand behind me and coach me through this and allow me to do the delivery. And so our doctor agreed and said that he would do that if he felt Blake was in the right condition to be able to do it. So once Blake walked to the foot of the bed and saw the baby's head for the first time starting to, you know, come down, he was like, oh my gosh, and he just turned white. And I remember doubting if he would be able to actually follow through with the delivery for a minute, but he's like, just give me 1 minute, I just gotta pull it together. And he did. He went and told my mom and his mom, who both came into the room while I gave birth. He went and told them, all right, it's time to have a baby, like, come on in. So they did. They were at either side of my head, and my husband got suited up and went to the foot of the bed, and with our doctor standing right beside him, he delivered our baby completely. The doctor was kind of coaching him through it, saying like, you know, okay, you're gonna hold your hands in this position and the baby's neck is gonna go here, and you're gonna pull this way and his left shoulder is gonna pop out, and you're gonna pull this way and his right shoulder is gonna pop out, and then he'll be really slippery, but you'll just wanna set him right on mom's chest as soon as, you know, that he's delivered, and then we'll let you cut the cord. And all of that happened. Of course, it took, my whole birthing process was probably about 30 minutes long of pushing and everything else. I don't know, I probably pushed about 10 to 15 times. And I can remember after about 4 or 5 pushes, looking up at Blake and saying, I could do this again. Like, we can have more babies. Once I got my epidural, I was like super mom. I could have 1,000 babies. But seriously, to the women who do it without any kind of medication, you are literal queens. I don't know how it's possible. I was panicking, thinking that I was gonna die when I thought that I may have to have a completely natural birth. So kudos to you guys. They did end up having to give me an episiotomy, which is where they do a little cut rather than having you tear during the birthing process, which they just stitch right back up at the end. And once the baby was born, they put him on my chest. Blake cut the cord, and then our hospital gave us exactly an hour each of skin to skin, just alone time with the baby before they even took him away to take his weight or measurement or anything. So at this point, once I had finished the delivery, they stitched me back up from the episiotomy. I had finished delivering the afterbirth, which is a whole nother thing. Luckily, my epidural was obviously still kicked in and I wasn't in a ton of pain, but I did want to be able to feel what I was doing when I was pushing, and I wanted to know that, I don't know, I was feeling pressure in the right areas. So I had kind of let it wear off just a little, but we did skin to skin for an hour each. And then they weighed the baby, and he was 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and 19.5 inches long. He was absolutely gorgeous. And looking back now, I definitely, it was totally worth, obviously, the whole pregnancy and birthing experience. I want to do it again. I want more kids. But I will say, if I have another pregnancy like my first pregnancy, I don't know that I will want to have a third as badly as I do now, because you guys, pregnancy was rough. I could go through the birthing process 3 times before having to do a full pregnancy. Like, I would prefer that. But I know each story is different. Every pregnancy and every birth is different. So we'll see how the next one goes. I did want to mention that during my pregnancy, I went to Walgreens and I decided to use just like straight vitamin E oil. You can get little containers of it, and I would go through them pretty frequently, but I would stock up and buy a couple at a time, and I would use that on my belly as a stretch mark preventative. So, the only stretch mark, I would say my belly is pretty much back to normal, how it was before Judah was born. The only stretch mark I got was right here. I don't know if you can see that, like right above my belly button. Because of my belly button ring, I don't wear it anymore, but right where that hole was, there was a stretch mark caused. But other than that, I would say that the vitamin E oil seemed to work pretty well, and I didn't get a ton of stretch marks, so I would recommend that for sure. So before we go, I wanted to introduce you to my crazy haired 15-month-old little boy. Can you say hi? Hi. And my husband Blake over there. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.